Hello everyone, it's Parisha from The Artistic Scroll, and in this tutorial we're going to learn how to draw this magical staff in Procreate. But before we get started, here's what you'll need: your iPad and pencil, the Procreate app, and the sketch file and color palette for the tutorial, and you can download the files for free from the Artistic Archive, which is my special vault of free resources that I've created just for you. So go ahead and download them now, and let's dive into the tutorial. So this is what the downloaded canvas will look like once you open it in Procreate. And as you can see, the sketch is already there and it's present on layer 1 here, as you can see. So all we need to do is change the background color to be able to see the sketch a bit better. So now we just need to select the magical staff color palette, set it as default, and then move the menu to the left. And to be able to see the sketch better, just tap on this background color option and select the first really dark purple color that we've got here. And there you go, you can see your sketch. So now let's just reduce the opacity of the sketch layer and then rename the sketch layer as sketch later on if you want. But we're just going to move on and go ahead, create a new layer under the sketch layer. And this time let's select the technical pen brush in inking. And this brown color, we're going to go ahead and paint in the outline of this wooden staff. And once the outline is done, you can fill it all in. Now fill in the color, and there you go. Remember to include these little stalks of the leaves here as well as part of the staff. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so we're going to be creating a new layer on top of this staff layer, and then with this turquoise green color, we're going to be painting in the leaves. So you can go ahead and either outline all of them together and then fill them in, or just fill them in as you go, whichever works for you. And as you can see, I have outlined all of them first, and I'm just tapping on continue filling to fill them all in one go. Great! So the next step that we need to do is paint in the star. So create a new layer above the leaves layer. And then with the same technical pen brush and the yellow color this time, paint in the outline for the star. And then fill it in once that's done. Brilliant. Next step would be to paint in these gold bands. So create a new layer above the wooden staff layer, and then with the same yellow color and the technical pen brush, paint and fill in these gold bands. Okay, That's great. Our next step would be to paint in the ribbons. So there's a big ribbon and a small ribbon, as you can see. We need to create one new layer above the staff, and then with this dark purple color, paint in the big ribbon first. And both ribbons have a darker and a lighter surface, depending on which side is twisted up. So as you can see, we're painting in the darker surface first. The alternate one would be the one that we're painting dark again. Because as you can see, they're twisting on themselves. So one side would be darker, the other side would be lighter. We'll paint in the lighter ones on a different layer, so don't worry about that. Right now, we're just painting in the darker edge of the darker surface of the big ribbon first. So paint in these darker surfaces first. And remember to get these tapered edges right here, pointing and coming together right at the end. And this is where the technical pen brush comes in use so much, because it's got a nice sharp tapering edge that we can take advantage of here. And remember to draw this little end portion of the ribbon too, and fill in all the gaps. Perfect. Now we're going to draw the small ribbon's darker end. So create a new layer on top of this one and paint in this darker edge first. And then you can go ahead and erase this little portion of the curled up ribbon from this background of the other ribbon. Well, the other side of the ribbon. Now paint in this end portion of the small ribbon. And fill it in. Alright, so now it's time to go ahead and create the lighter edges of both ribbons. So we'll create a new layer above the staff layer. And with this lighter purple color, we'll begin with the lighter surface of the big ribbon first. So go ahead and outline the ribbons and then fill them in. Remember to keep your ribbon edges congruent with the flow of the ribbon itself, so that they kind of meld into each other rather than have rough, very abrupt edges which don't coincide with each other, because this is one big ribbon that is folding on itself in a way, isn't it? So we kind of need to make sure that the edges will come together. Okay, that looks great, I think. Now it's time to go ahead and create a new layer on top of the gold bands layer. We're going to be painting in the twine. So with this beige color selected and the same technical pen brush, let's go ahead and paint in this twine. You can either reduce the size of your brush a bit. I've got it around 7%, but I think a 5% might be a bit better than that. You can go for an even thinner one if you want, but 5% seems to be a good size. So go ahead and paint in this twine that is curving all around this wooden stuff. Okay, good stuff. Now we're going to create a new layer on top of this twine layer, and we'll be painting in the beads. So the first beads layer will be with the pink color. So go ahead and paint in these pink beads. Now you can either follow the same pattern as I am with the color of the beads, or you can just paint in your beads, whichever beads you want to paint in pink, you can paint those pink. And when we're done with that, we can create a new layer above the pink beads layer. And then with this really light lilac color, which is almost white in a way, we'll create the second beads layer. Okay, so all our flat colors are in. We're now going to be starting work on our staff. So let's go ahead and create a new clipping mask to the staff layer. And we'll be painting in these pale cut edges of the wooden staff with the same beige color as the twine. Now you can imagine when you cut a tree, you see that the inner surface, the cut surface of the tree itself is paler, and that's the same effect that we want to achieve here with the staff. Oops, that filled the wrong way. Okay, and this is the last one. Fill it in. Okay, that looks good. So the next task would be to paint in these rings on the wooden surface. So create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode of this layer to multiply this time. And we'll be painting in these rings with the dry ink brush in inking, because it's got a nice gritty, rough sort of a texture, which isn't too rough, but just enough to give us a bit more texture to the wooden surface that we're trying to achieve here. And you can reduce the size of your brush to somewhere around 2 or 3% depending on how thick you want the rings to be. And then with the same beige color, paint in all the rings. Remember to paint in the rings on the pale surfaces as well. Okay, once that's done, we can go ahead and turn the sketch layer off. That looks good. Alright, so our next task would be to go ahead and add some more texture to this wooden staff. And for that, we're going to go to Charcoals in the brush library and select the Burnt Tree brush this time. Now create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode of this layer to Multiply. And then with the same beige color selected and the brush size of around 29 to 30%, just very lightly paint in this burnt tree texture. I don't know how it's supposed to be burnt tree, but it is. Alright, so then reduce the opacity to around 40%. And there you can see it's got a nice gritty texture already to it. Now create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode to multiply. And we'll add another layer of texture. So select this brown color. And then this time we're going to select this willow charcoal brush in charcoals. And my brush size is around 4%. You can see what works better for you. Or you can follow through with the same. Just lightly paint in this charcoal texture. And this time we'll just duplicate this layer now and change the blend mode of the top duplicated layer to overlay this time. Because we want a little bit more light there. It is looking pretty dark, but we need to add some shadows to give this wooden staff a bit more of a 3D form. So let's go ahead and create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to multiply. And then this time with the soft airbrush in airbrushing and with the same brown color selected, just go ahead and paint shadows on the edges of this wooden staff. And make sure to reduce the size of your brush a bit so it's not too large and you're able to control the size of the shadows that you are creating there. You can be a bit uneven with where you're placing your shadows as well. As you can see, I am adding a bit more shadow in some of the curves, so that gives an impression or like an illusion of you know, where the surface is a bit more bumpy and modulated in a way. So that's the kind of effect that we want to achieve here. So paint all the shadows here on the edges. And once you're done with that, we'll apply a Gaussian blur in the adjustments panel of just about 4%. Now it's looking a bit too dark. We need to add some more highlights. So create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to add. And this time with the beige color and the same soft airbrush, we're going to paint in the highlights just in the central area of this wooden staff. And you can add the highlights on these cut pale edges as well. Gives it a nice glowy kind of an effect. And just along the central areas, paint in these highlights. Now go to Gaussian blur and then blur this again to around 4%. Reduce the opacity of this layer to, let's say, around 70%. And I think that looks much better. We can go ahead and blend these in gently too. Some areas, if we think that it's too bright in some areas, blending with the soft airbrush really helps. Okay, so you can see now it's looking like a proper, like it's got a form, isn't it? Like a 3D form. And that's what we want. All right, that looks great. So now it's time to work on the star. But before we do that, let's go ahead and group all of the staff layers together and then rename this group as staff. Okay, so let's work with the star now. So create a new clipping mask to the star layer and change the blend mode to multiply. And let's go ahead and select this yellow color itself. Yeah, if you want to work with yellow. And then just on the edges of the star, paint in these shadows. Well, you won't exactly call them shadows, or you can actually, because we are trying to give this star a bit more of a 3D shape. So in a way, yeah, you can imagine that these are shadows that we are creating. because the central part of the star can be imagined to be protruding higher than the edges. Now apply a Gaussian blur of around 3%, and now create a new layer for the highlights. So new clipping mask, and change the blend mode to add. And then paint in the highlights, just in the center. And then apply a Gaussian blur to this layer as well of around 3%. And we can reduce the opacity of this layer to somewhere around 60%. Now I just want to blend these slightly because it looks a bit too stiff as a highlight to me. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Give it a bit more form and a curve at the edges there. And if you feel, you can even add a little bit more of color there to bring in the brightness. And I've actually gone ahead and applied another bit of blur there, about 2% more blur to the shadow layer and some more blur to the highlights layer of about 4%, just so that it gives a nicer, more blended look. Okay, so next we're going to be applying some of the glow from the star to the staff. But before we do that, go ahead and group all the star layers together and rename the group as star. So go to the staff group now and create a new clipping mask on top. Change the blend mode to add. And then with the same soft airbrush and the yellow color selected, you can increase the brush size to somewhere around 10 or 11%. Now just add in some of the glow to this inner surface of the wooden staff. You can see that's starting to look good, isn't it? You can reduce the opacity of this layer to around 50%. Don't worry, we'll be adding in some more glows in a minute. You can add in a bit more color to this so that it helps. And then create a new clipping mask just below this yellow glow layer and change the blend mode of that to add as well. And this time select the orange color. And we're going to go ahead and paint in this orange glow here. Now apply a Gaussian blur of around 5%. And then you can blend some of this as well. I've even extended a bit of this glow a little bit more beyond just the ring itself. Just to give it a bit more brightness. And that looks good. You can even add in a bit of yellow there on the yellow glow layer. And I think that looks great. Okay, so the next task would be to go ahead and add some highlights to these tree rings themselves. So create a new clipping mask under the glow layers, change the blend mode to add, and then choose the dry ink brush. And with this brown color, go ahead and paint in these highlights. Okay, so that looks great. Now reduce the opacity of this layer to around 50%. And that looks really nice. Now you can see that we need some shadows of the twine and the ribbon on the staff, but we'll do that later. Now it's time to work on the leaves themselves. So let's go ahead and do that. Create a new clipping mask just above the leaves layer. And then change the blend mode to multiply. Then select the technical pen brush in inking, and with the green color selected, let's go ahead and paint in the central veins of all the leaves. And once that's done, we can reduce the opacity of this layer to 50%. Okay, so it's time to add some shadows to our leaves now. So create a new clipping mask to the leaves layer, change the blend mode to multiply. And then with the same green color and the soft airbrush, we'll paint in the shadows of the leaves. Now imagine that the light source is the star, so we'll expect the shadows of the leaves to be away from this light source. So paint in these shadows wherever you think that they might land on the leaf when they're away from the light source. Okay, so now it's time to add some highlights. So create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode to add. And with this orange color selected, paint in the highlights. And these highlights will be opposite the shadows. Gives a nice yellowish warm glow to the leaves as well, doesn't it? Okay, so that looks great. Now reduce the opacity of this layer to around 60%. And then now we're going to add a bit of texture to the leaves themselves. So create a new clipping mask above the veins layer and change the blend mode to multiply. And then in charcoal, select the 2B compressed brush. And with the green color selected, go ahead and paint in this slight texture to the leaves. I just love the way this star is shining. It looks so nice and warm and glowing, doesn't it? Okay, that looks great. Now group all of these leaves layers together. Remember to include your base leaves layer too. And then rename this group as leaves. Excellent. Now it's time to work on the gold bands layer now. So create a new clipping mask to the gold bands layer and then change the blend mode to multiply. We're going to start off by adding some shadows. So let's go ahead and select the soft airbrush. And then with this beige color, let's paint in the shadows just at the edges. And a shadow where this ribbon is falling on the band itself too. Okay, now apply a Gaussian blur of just around 2%. The next step would be to add a highlight. So create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to add. And then with the yellow color selected, go ahead and paint in the highlight just in the center of the gold bands. Now apply a 2% Gaussian blur to this layer as well. And we'll add one more layer in a second. Just reduce the opacity of this layer to around 40%, then create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to multiply. And this time select this yellow color again, and then paint in this little color gradient in a way, just where we had placed our shadows. And apply a 2% Gaussian blur to this too. Okay, so I think that looks great. Now reduce the opacity of this layer to somewhere around 75%. And let's go ahead and group all of these gold bands layer together and rename that group as gold bands. Okay, so the next thing we're going to work on will be the ribbons, and we'll be working on both the big and the small ribbons together. So create new clipping masks to both the dark surfaces of the ribbons, and then we're going to change their blend modes to multiply. Now select the dark purple color, and with the soft airbrush go ahead and paint in the shadow on the lower surface or the lower edge of the darker ribbon. Now here's what I meant. You need to just be careful about these edges and make sure that they are congruent. So as you can see, the ribbon out here wasn't flowing into the other section. So I've just made that change, and I'm doing this for the other end as well. If you've done the same, you can go ahead and create those changes for yourself too. So continue adding in these shadows to the lower edges of the dark ribbon. And then you can go ahead and blend them as well with the soft airbrush as your smudge tool. That gives it a nice shadowy gradient. Okay, so we'll be repeating this step on the smaller ribbon as well. So create your shadows on the dark, smaller ribbon. And for this part of the illustration, it might be helpful if you turn on the sketch layer so that you can see where exactly the shadows would begin. And once you're happy with that, just reduce the opacity of the sketch layer so that you can see the edges a bit better. And go ahead and just smudge these shadows in. Okay, so that looks great. We're now going to be adding in some highlights. So create a new clipping mask to both of these layers and then change their blend modes to add. Now with the same dark purple color and the soft airbrush, paint your highlights on the opposite end of the shadows. So this will be on the top end of the ribbon. And then once again, blend these highlights in. And once you're happy with that, just reduce the opacity of this layer to 50%. Now repeat this step for the smaller ribbon. And then you can blend them out. Okay, and reduce the opacity of this layer to 50%. And that looks good. Now you just want to add some occlusion shadows to these ribbons. So create a new clipping mask again to both of these layers and change their blend modes to multiply. So just in the areas where these ribbons are folding onto themselves, we're going to be adding in the shadows there. So as you can see, just around the edges and where we're seeing things are sort of overlapping a bit, we want to add these occlusion shadows. And then repeat this step for adding in the shadows to the bigger dark ribbon too. Okay, so our next step would be to add in this orangish star glow to the dark ribbons too. So create new clipping masks to both of these layers and then change the blend modes to add. And then with the same soft airbrush and this yellow color selected, you can increase the brush size to around 9% and then paint in this gentle, warm golden color highlight to the upper edge of both of these ribbons. Repeat the step for the smaller ribbon or the bigger one, whichever one you started off working with. And that looks great. Okay, so for our next step, we'll be painting in these lighter ribbons, but let's group all of these layers together first and then rename this first group as the small dark ribbon. And then we're going to rename the other group as the big dark ribbon. Simple, isn't it? Alright, so now we know we're going to be working on these lighter surfaces of both ribbons. So create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode to multiply, not add, change it to multiply. We're repeating the same steps as we did for the dark ribbons. So we're creating a general shadow first with the multiplied blend modes. Then select this light purple color and then go ahead and start off with the shadows. We're painting the shadows on the lower edge of these ribbons. And then we're just going to blend this in as well. Now repeat this step for the smaller light ribbon and paint in your shadows. And then blend them in. Okay, so now let's create some new clipping masks to both of these layers and change their blend modes to add. We're adding some general highlights, so you know the drill. With the same light purple color, go ahead and paint in these highlights on the opposite ends of the shadows. Now reduce the opacity of this layer to 50%. And then let's go back to this lighter surface of the smaller ribbon. Add in your highlight there and then blend it in. And then reduce the opacity to 50%. Now create a new clipping mask to both of these layers and change the blend modes to multiply. We're going to be painting in the occlusion shadows. So with the same light purple color selected and the soft airbrush, paint in these shadows. You can paint in the shadow of the leaf as well and the gold band. The same as we did for adding in the shadows for the twine on the big ribbon. And then go to your smaller ribbon and add in the occlusion shadows there. Alright, it's time to add the glow now to your ribbons. So create new clipping masks and change the blend modes to add. We'll be adding in the yellowish glow there on both of these layers. So let's go back and select this yellow color and paint in this gold highlight. Now go to the other ribbon and paint in the yellowish glow there too. Okay, so that's looking really nice. We're done with the ribbons, so let's go ahead and group all of these together. Name this first group as small light ribbon. And the lower group as big light ribbon. Okay, that looks great. We are now going to be working on the beads. So let's go ahead and select this first layer of beads, which is the purple layer. And then create a new clipping mask there and change the blend mode to multiply. Now I've selected the technical pen brush, but I'll change it back to soft airbrush in a second. Put in the shadows of these pink beads with the blue color, which is right next to the pink color on our palette. And there you go, I've just selected the soft airbrush and we're reducing the size to somewhere around 3%. And that should be good. So we want this bead to have a bit of a colder shadow, so that's why we're not going with the pink color for the shadows themselves. They wanted to have a little bit more of a color gradient in this bead itself. So create all your shadows on the opposite sides of the light source, depending on their positions. And when you're done with that, we're going to add some highlights to our beads. So create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to add. And this time we're going to select this orange color for the highlight. So again, with the soft airbrush, paint in these highlights on the opposite ends of the shadows. Okay, so those beads look good. Let's group these layers together and rename this group as pink beads. Now we're going to be working on this second layer of beads. So let's go ahead and create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to multiply. This time we are working with the shadows and we're using the same color as the bead itself, which will be somewhat this whitish lilac color. So again, follow the same steps as we did for the pink beads. Create your shadows on the other side of the light source, hitting them. And then when you're done with that, let's create a new clipping mask for the highlights. Change the blend mode to add, and with the orange color, paint in these highlights. Okay, so our beads are ready and they look great. Alright, so let's group all of these layers together and then rename this group as lilac beads. But it does not want to listen, so we're just changing it to white beads, or whatever you want to call them. Okay, great. So it's time now to work on the twine layer. So the beads are going to cause some shadows there. So we need to create those. So let's create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply. And then with the beige color selected and the soft airbrush size just very small, somewhere around 2 to 3%, create these shadows caused by anything, even overlapping twine layers, as you can see there. You can even trim the edges of these twine ends. So create all of these shadows wherever you think that there might be shadows there, especially around the edges there. And you can delineate these twine layers from each other with the help of these shadows, especially in all of the areas they are overlapping each other. So I'm just going to go ahead and erase this part of the twine that's actually supposed to be behind the ribbon itself. So returning to the base layer, I'm just erasing that. That looks great. Okay, so let's resume adding the shadows. And once you're done with all of that, let's go ahead and create some highlights. So new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add, and then we're adding in these highlights in the centers of the twine. Okay, so the twine looks great. Let's go ahead and group all of the twine layers together and rename the group as Twine. And then we can see that the twine has created some shadows on the wooden staff and whatever it's overlapping. So let's go to our staff group now and create a new clipping mask just below the glow layers and change the blend mode to multiply. And with this brown color and the technical pen brush, let's go ahead and paint in the shadows of the twine. Now you might have to play around with the size of the brush. I've got it to somewhere around 6 to 7%. You can work with what's comfortable for you, but I think this size should be good. Remember to create the shadows of the beads as well. Now you can see that the twine overlies this gold band as well. So let's go back to the gold band layer, the shadow clipping mask, and then create a bit of the shadow of the twine there too. Then return to the staff layer and continue adding more shadows. Okay, so our shadows are all in place. That looks great. We need to add some glow now. So let's go ahead and do that. So create a new layer and move it under the staff group. And then change the blend mode of this layer to add. Now we're going to select the soft airbrush again. And with this orange color, we want to add a gentle glow around the staff and also the leaves. Let's start off with the leaves first. Now you can play around with the size of the brush as what's comfortable for you. And I've actually changed from orange to the yellow color, and then reduced the opacity of the brush to around 50% for this particular step. So you can actually build upon how much you want to apply, how much of a glow you want to apply to the staff itself. We don't want it to be overwhelming in the first go itself. We'll be adding another layer of glow, so don't worry if it doesn't look too bright at all. Just around the edges of the staff, go ahead and paint in this glow. Just so that it can feel like it's slightly emanating around it. And then for the ribbons themselves, we just want a glow on the lower edge of the ribbon itself. So I've reduced my brush size to somewhere around 7 to 8%. And I think initially it was somewhere around 17%. But again, that's something that I am comfortable with. You can try what works for you. Okay, so once you're done with this step, we need to go ahead and duplicate this layer. And once it's duplicated, just go ahead and tap on Alpha Lock for the lower duplicated layer. And then with the soft airbrush selected and the orange color, we're going to make this yellow glow orange for this lower duplicated layer. And you can see it's got a nice gradient now. And that's exactly what we want. So turn off the Alpha Lock and then apply a Gaussian blur to this lower duplicated layer to around 15%. That looks beautiful. Alright, so I want to add some fireflies around the star now to make it look a bit more magical. So let's go ahead and do that. Create a new layer right above the star group. And then we're going to change the blend mode to add. And then in luminance in the brush library, select the light pen brush. And then I've got a brush size of around 7%. We've still got the orange color selected. Paint in these little glowing fireflies just around the top end of the staff and especially around the star itself. And that gives it a nice, soft, gentle, magical look in itself. I think that looks good. Okay, so before we just close it all off, I think we might need to make a few more changes to the glow itself. And to do that, let's just go ahead and go back to our first glow layer and reduce the opacity slightly to somewhere around 50%. And that's it, guys. This looks great. Thank you so much for joining me in this tutorial, and I hope you had fun creating a bit of magic with me today with this magical stuff. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you liked the tutorial, and don't forget to get your sketches and palettes from the Artistic Archive with the link in the description. I'll see you in the next one.